The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Democrats will talk till they're blue in the face about the Mueller report, but there are storm clouds for them just over the horizon. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. Attorney General William Barr drops a bombshell, as they call it, saying he believes the Trump presidential campaign was spied on by the Obama Justice Department and that a full report on just how and why will be forthcoming in months, if not weeks. Another Democrat enters the presidential fray, bringing the field to 18 candidates, and this time it's a guy who's made a living off calling President Trump treasonous. LibertyNation.com national correspondent Joe Schaefer will join us to analyze the state of play in the Democrats' crowded primary race. Plus, we've got the view from flyover country with LibertyNation.com national columnist Sarah Cowgill, and New York State threatening to release Trump's tax returns, as explained by LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out some of the most wacky, astonishing, and damnable things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. Democrats will be talking about the Mueller report for as long as they can get anyone to keep listening, but there could well be a big-time reckoning ahead for them after Attorney General William Barr testified before the House Judiciary Committee and made the biggest news of the week, Mueller aside, saying that his department is focusing right now on how the whole Russian collusion delirium started, with the Obama Justice Department and FBI using that fake Russian dossier ordered up by the Hillary Clinton campaign as the basis for a series of 4 FISA warrants that led to Obama's FBI investigating the Trump 2016 campaign and eventually leading to the Mueller investigation.
The Office of the Inspector General has a pending investigation of the FISA process in the Russian investigation. I am going to be reviewing both the genesis and the conduct of intelligence activities directed at the Trump campaign during 2016. I think spying on a political campaign is a big deal.
So you're not suggesting, though, that spying occurred?
I don't, I guess you could, I think spying did occur. Yes, I think spying did occur.
He wasn't quite sure what to say now, was he? Apparently not expecting that particular question. But Attorney General Barr is now on the record as believing the stories that have circulated for months on end about the Obama Justice Department setting up and spying on the Trump campaign, stories which have been thoroughly documented, but of course ignored by the elite media because it didn't fit their prefabricated narrative that Trump was the perpetrator of Russian collusion and Hillary Clinton was a victim. But they won't be able to ignore it once the Inspector General comes out with his report. Of course, they'll attack the Inspector General, Michael Horowitz, the same way they attacked Attorney General Barr. But then, what else is new? Meanwhile, as Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen stepped down and was replaced by the head of Customs and Border Patrol, Kevin McAleenan, and the head of Secret Service was also replaced, Democrats spoke in ominous terms about Trump's shakeup and got the elite media to, as usual, dutifully do the left's bidding on Trump's purge of the DHS. And a former FBI official, a guy named Frank Fizioli, actually went on MSNBC and said the two resignations amount to workplace violence.
Happening now, breaking news, security purge.
A full-scale purge at DHS.
A full-scale purge.
So what's next in this staffing purge?
After the president's purge of those top officials of the Department of Homeland Security.
It looks like an all-out purge of the leadership ranks.
After a purge at the Department of Homeland Security.
The president is overseeing, quote, a near systematic purge. The purge.
Purge continues.
After a purge of top officials.
That purge continues.
The president's purge of...
Niger, we've seen the purge.
Are we watching a president essentially on his way to what we call a flashpoint? And are we now beginning to see him act out in the form of purging? Are we essentially watching a workplace violence incident play out at the highest level of our government?
You serious? Workplace violence? That's what it's come to in the Democrats' never-ending quest to kneecap the 45th president. The bulging field of Democrats looking to unseat President Trump grew to 18 candidates this week with the entrance of Eric Swalwell, an obscure congressman from California who made a name for himself as one of the most deranged Trump-Russia conspiracy theorists in the House. And it seemed fitting somehow that Swalwell would announce on, of all places, a late-night comedy show. Stephen Colbert.
I talk to kids who sit in their classroom afraid that they'll be the next victim of gun violence. And they see Washington doing nothing about it after the moments of silence. And they see lawmakers who love their guns more than they love our kids. And none of that is going to change until we get a leader who is willing to go big on the issues we take on, be bold in the solutions we offer, and do good in the way that we govern. I'm ready to solve these problems. I'm running for president of the United States.
So gun control will be Swalwell's big issue, but he's made his name by hurling scurrilous accusations at Trump all over the airwaves. Here was Swalwell advancing his Trump-Russia conspiracy theory before the Mueller report was completed, and then after, when Trump was cleared of collusion.
I've seen plenty of evidence of collusion. We have very good circumstantial evidence that the Trump team, the family, the businesses were eager to work and were working with the Russians while the Russians were helping them. And I think in the court of law, that's enough. Just because you are criminally a non-colluder doesn't mean that we don't want to know what evidence Bob Mueller found about efforts you and your team and your family and your business took to work with the Russians.
All Russia, all the time. Swalwell has about as good a chance of winning the presidency as Kirsten Gillibrand, the backbench senator from New York. And all you need to know about Senator Gillibrand is what she says here about the last Democrat nominee.
Hillary Clinton put that 65 million cracks in that highest and hardest glass ceiling. She's inspired the world by her bravery and courage to do what she thought was right, to run for president twice, to be a national leader for her whole life. She's given her life to public service. And so, for me, Secretary Clinton is still a role model for all of us.
Okay, Hillary Clinton as a role model for all women. Good luck convincing Democrats of that. But while everyone knows Gillibrand is going nowhere, it appears that Bernie Sanders is. And Bernie's signature issue this time around is eliminating all private health care and replacing it with a $30+ trillion Medicare for All program run entirely by the government, a true single-payer system, as he outlined during an interview on CBS when he declared another new right.
Healthcare is a human right, whether you're old or young or rich or poor. Everybody in the United States of America, richest country on earth, is entitled to healthcare as a right. Second of all, the current healthcare system that we have is completely dysfunctional. You got 30 million people without any health insurance, and even more who are underinsured with high deductibles and high copayments. And then on top of that, you got parts of the country where people who do have health insurance can't even find a doctor.
And exactly whose fault is that? It's called Obamacare, passed without a single Republican vote, but it's as if the disaster that is Obamacare was somehow a concoction of Trump and the evil Republicans. But notice how Bernie simply declares that health care is a right. Now, where is that written? Our rights are outlined in the Constitution, but Democrats are coming up with new extra-constitutional rights all the time, as if their personal belief that something's a right is enough to make it a right. See how that works? Finally, we thought you'd like to hear from the man who was on the other side of the ginned-up Russia collusion delusion. Russian President Vladimir Putin weighed in this week.
Russia knows full well that it didn't interfere in any elections in the U.S. Moreover, there was no collusion that Mr. Mueller was trying to find between President Trump and Russia. We didn't know Mr. Trump. Yes, he did come to Moscow as a businessman, but it was not a big event for us. It was simply absurd, and it was meant for internal audience, and it was used for political purposes.
You think? Old Vladdy must have been sitting around laughing at us for the last 2 years, wondering just why Democrats were willing to fall on their swords for the sake of a fantasy. We will take a quick break and then come back with The View from Flyover Country.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
Truth
is making a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, if you parachuted someone into this country from outer space, that space alien would easily believe that everything that happens in this country happens in, by, and for the political establishment, and that only what happens in Washington and New York and California is actually meaningful. After all, the media seems to just talk amongst themselves. But that changed, perhaps forever, in 2016 when a veritable pitchfork revolution threatened the establishment's permanent hold on power. And yet the media remains myopic, transfixed on the incestuous game of Washington politics, inside baseball, and palace intrigue. That's why one of the most important features of LibertyNation.com is our regular reporting from flyover country, as the elites call it, once known as the Heartland. And national columnist Sarah Cowgill is the one who writes it up every week from her station in southern Indiana. And Sarah joins us now. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, Tim Donner.
Well, it's great to have you, and what I like about your writing is that you go out and you talk to real people all the time at truck stops and diners and bars in flyover country. What's the sense that you get on their view of this Washington focus on Russia and collusion and obstruction and the constant investigations?
Well, I got to tell you, the people I meet on the road, and I do a lot of crisscrossing. I do small trips, I do some big trips, and I go north, south, east, and west. And the truck stops are my favorite place because, heck, you find people traveling from all over the place going to somewhere else. So I got a really good, a good mix of people to deal with. And the one thing is they like to talk. They're happy to tell you why they voted for Trump. They're happy to tell you why they rose up with their pitchforks, as you said. Thanks for that image.
Anytime.
And took back their country. They took back their country, and they're darn proud to do it.
Well, now, how pleased do you think the folks who elected Trump that you referred to, how pleased do you think they are with his presidency so far? Is he what they thought or hoped he would be or not?
They believe that he has delivered on what he has promised, with the exception, the biggie is still the wall and immigration. And that's a big sticking point around here. People are worried, and they scoff at what the media tends to, bill it as. Oh, it's a charade, or it's not a crisis. It's made up. It's this, it's that. But in reality, the people in the Boot Hill of New Mexico and the people on the border in Texas are down there patrolling their own land. That's the government's job. That's not their job. The government's job is to keep them safe. So you have all sorts of self-governing. You have all sorts of people rising up. They're calling themselves rogues. If you label anybody in flyover country with what most people would consider a negative term, they wear it like a badge of honor.
Right.
They get T-shirts that say "I'm a rogue," I'm a deplorable. People just embrace that. They're not shamed into falling in lockstep with the liberals.
The wall. You say there's a singular focus, in some sense, on the wall and the so far inability of the president to get it done.
I talk about the wall a lot, so I've got a good pulse on that. And they do appreciate everything he does, and they lay the blame directly at the feet of the Democratic Party. They're not blaming Trump. They're wishing Trump would just go scorched earth, maybe, and, leave nothing but burning embers in his wake. But, he's still got to get through a couple more years. And also maybe what they're hoping is another 4 in 2020. And I really do believe that it's a frustration level, but they don't blame him. Mm-hmm. They do not like the Democrats. There is nothing about the Democratic Party right now that anyone I have met who is a conservative in flyover country, which is pretty much all of them, that they cannot stand and will not tolerate and cannot stomach these people. They're done. These are common sense people. They don't like all the shenanigans. They don't like all the silliness. They like to get the job done.
Okay, but let's talk a little more about the Democrats, because there will be one of them running against Trump. What kind of Democrat, which Democrat of the 18 now running for president, do you think has the best chance of winning back those states behind the famous blue wall that Trump shockingly won in 2016?
If you take away all of the socialists and the mouthy women, that kind of leaves you with Joe Biden. And he would probably resonate a little bit, but people don't like him either because he's Joe Biden and he worked for Obama. And he's kind of a has-been. But you cannot talk socialism in flyover country. That it's just a no way.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for providing what I think of as a loading dose of common sense into a political process with very little common sense mixed in.
We like to go from point A to point B in a straight line in flyover country. We don't like the silliness.
Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Thanks, Tim. It's always a pleasure.
Sarah Cowgill, LibertyNation.com national columnist. Up next, we'll examine the state of play in a Democratic presidential field grown to 18 candidates.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel because
Truth
Is
making a comeback.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, with the entrance of yet another Democrat into the bulging field of candidates trying to unseat President Trump in the 2020 presidential election, The question now seems to be what Democrats are not running for president. Here to illuminate us on the state of play in a race that's kicked off earlier than any presidential campaign in history is LibertyNation.com national correspondent Joe Schaefer. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
I appreciate it. Now, arguably the most deranged of the Trump haters in the House of Representatives, the once obscure backbencher from California, Eric Swalwell, becomes the 18th candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination, riding the wave of his high-profile attacks on Trump over the last 2 years. And you got to admit, Joe, he probably is leading the race for the cherished distinction of who hates Trump the most. Yes?
Oh, yeah, that's his tagline. That's what he's going for. I don't know if you saw his ad that he came out with announcing his candidacy, sort of. It's on YouTube, where he just came out and used the word, well, I won't use it on the air, BS, but he didn't say BS, to talk about Trump. So he's already using that kind of language. He's the tough guy. He's the guy who wants to stand up to Trump. So again, he's another Democrat who takes his cue from Trump as opposed to having any unique ideas of his own, which, no surprise, that's what they're all like, aren't they?
Well, you can't say they're short of ideas, Joe. Of course, all of them are socialist ideas, but that's neither here nor there. Now, this week, Kirsten Gillibrand, who I think really has to be the emptiest of all the suits on the Democratic side, running to be commander-in-chief of U.S. Armed Forces, referred to tactile nuclear weapons instead of tactical. And all of the other candidates, except perhaps Joe Biden, who's got real problems of his own, don't exactly present as trustworthy on national security issues. Joe, who are the grown-ups in the Democrats' room?
I don't know. You have to tell me. That's sort of the argument for Joe Biden, isn't it? That, he's experienced and grizzled, and he knows his way around all these issues. But again, this is a party that wants to go young. They want generational change. So you're not going to find somebody who has all that down. And in that regard, for the primary, for winning the Democratic nomination, I don't think it's actually going to hurt these people that they don't have their chops on all this stuff. But at the same time, in a general election, that's the kind of stuff that comes back to haunt you. But to me, when you talk about national security and who's the adults, Tulsi Gabbard had an absolutely crucial interview with a liberal freelance journalist named Michael Tracy the other week. I think it was about a week ago. She's an announced presidential candidate in his Democratic field, and she came out and said that members of her own party are risking World War III with Russia just so they can score points attacking Trump. Why isn't the major media reporting this, that a Democratic presidential candidate basically called out the other people in her party?
Because it doesn't fit their narrative, Joe. That's
absolutely
why.
Shocking. So this is what I'm hoping. Tulsi Gabbard, I think she's close now to earning that minimum of supporters that you need to be in the debates. She's going to be in the debates. I just hope we have that moment on stage where she calls them out like that. And I want to see some of the reaction of these people. You talk about not being adults, the reckless talk against Trump, threatening that's a national security threat right there, when you're saber rattling with nuclear armed foreign nations just to score domestic political points against a political opponent. That is reckless and irresponsible.
Our guest is Joe Schaefer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. And Joe, it's remarkable. The top tier of Democratic presidential candidates, we're not talking about outliers, people who have no chance for the nomination. They've all endorsed the Green New Deal and reparations for the descendants of slaves and Medicare for all. And some of them believe in abolishing the Electoral College, packing the Supreme Court. Nancy Pelosi wants to lower the voting age to 16. Now, Joe, for most of our lives, Democrats ran away from even being called liberal. What's changed that they now openly embrace socialism?
Well, it's inside their own party. The party's taken a hard turn to the left. You could argue that this started with Obama. You could say it goes back further than that. Demographic change certainly has something to do with that. They think these immigrants coming in are all future Democratic voters, but they're also not traditional Democrats, going back 40, 50, whatever years. Many of them come from countries that, quite frankly, embrace socialism. So they're new in our country, but socialism doesn't scare them, and they're the growing Democratic voter base. So in that regard, it's not surprising. These are candidates. They're all going to have to run to the left to capture this Democratic nomination, and then I want to see the pivot once they get that. Whoever gets that nomination, we've been talking about socialism basically for 6, 7, however many months it's going to be, and then what happens when you get into the general election? The 180-degree turn, if it's going to be a 180-degree turn, should be interesting to observe.
Not that Trump is going to point out all the socialist things they said during the primary campaign.
He would never do that.
No, of course not. That's not his style, Joe. Do you think it was the success of Bernie Sanders in inciting this sort of grassroots revolution that was kind of a mirror image to Trump in 2016? The incredible wave of small individual donations that added up to tens of millions of dollars for Bernie Sanders. Do you think that was what convinced all these candidates that, socialism is now something that they not only could not run away from, but actually embrace because of Bernie?
Yes, I think this comes from an absence of ideas of their own. There's an idea of vacuum in the Democratic Party, and it was filled with Bernie being the natural, at the time, alternative to Hillary Clinton. And so he was the only one challenging, establishment, tired, old, corrupt Hillary Clinton's Democratic Party, which everybody wanted to see go away, including most Democrats. So it made his brand of socialism look like more of a true alternative than I think it is. And so you have these people who really don't have any ideas of their own, and this made a mark on the party in 2016. So they think that they have to go in this direction. And they're all, it's amazing how they all parrot this new line. I mean, none of them is going to really come out against the Green New Deal, even if some of them think it's financially crazy. They're all saying the same things. I didn't notice it completely, but did a single one of them say it's crazy to allow 60-year-olds to vote?
No,
I didn't hear a single one of them say that.
No.
It's crazy. They are afraid to go against this pronounced democratic orthodoxy, and the people pushing this pronounced democratic orthodoxy are these urbanite blue center Bernie supporters. So in that regard, it's kind of crazy. Bernie Sanders, in a big way, his people are pushing the agenda of this party, and the presidential candidates are all just falling in line.
Well, let's talk about that from another angle, and that would be the AOC effect, the spell that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has seemed to cast over the Democratic Party, where facts are just incidental to the cherished narrative that the time has come for true democratic socialism in this country. Is anyone in this party prepared to stand up to this 29-year-old former bartender?
Absolutely not. No chance. They're scared of her. And I think, again, it's a credit to Ocasio-Cortez. Not that I want to credit her having great ideas, but she stands for something. Yes, she's a creature of this organization, Justice Democrats. But, again, I don't think that that's a big mark against her. This group, Justice Democrats, they stand for something. It's a radical progressive agenda, but they do have their agenda. And they are going and trying to find young voices for this agenda. And you would think it wouldn't be too hard for more veteran, established, sensible Democrat politicians to handle a 29-year-old newcomer, but they absolutely have not been able to handle her. And what does that say about them?
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Go ahead. What do you think that says, Tim?
Well, I think I'll go back to what you were saying about AOC. You have to give her credit for becoming almost like the Trump of the far left, in the sense that she's become a magnet for attention from both her own party and from conservatives who attack her all the time. She's become a lightning rod and done it at 29 years old. You have to admire her just from for lack of a better term, public relations standpoint. I mean, she has become the thing in the Democratic Party. Thanks for joining us, Joe.
Thank you, Tim.
Joe Schaefer, national correspondent for LibertyNation.com. Quick break, and then we're back to discuss the Democrats' latest strategy for releasing Trump's tax returns.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now it is time to talk liberty with regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
It's all New York all the time for this particular segment. I doubt we'll leave the Empire State before the segment is over, but let's dive right in with Governor Andrew Cuomo and his cronies and Trump tax returns. You've written about it. Tell us about it.
Well, nationally and now at the state level, the push for Democrats has been to get Donald Trump's tax returns out into the public eye. Their theory seems to be quite simply that Donald Trump has, through various legal means, and I want to stress that they're legal means, there's no allegation here that Trump has committed fraud or criminal tax evasions, but just that he has used every single possible loophole, pinhole, whatever, to pay as little tax as possible, and that once that true fact is revealed, if it is in fact a true fact, that the voters will be, ready with their pitchforks because they have to pay taxes and he doesn't. And so there's been this push ever since before the 2016 presidential election that Donald Trump needs to release his tax returns. Well, he's bucked it. He said no. He refuses to do so. They're now trying to do it at the state level. New York, so Cuomo obviously trying to get out of New York State and do something his father didn't do, which was move into the White House. Right. He's trying to get the New York State legislature to pass a law because the New York State tax return mimics the federal tax return, not in the sense of the necessarily obligation owed, but in terms of the disclosures, Tim. So the law would say that the New York State taxing authorities can release to the appropriate congressional committee a New York State tax return. It's a bit convoluted, but here's how you have to think about it. Now that the Democrats control the House of Representatives, this is set up so that the appropriate person is a Democrat in the House of Representatives. They send the letter to the New York, if this legislation were to pass, they send the letter to the New York State taxing authorities, and then they send over the tax return, which of course will then be on CNN, an hour after that. That's the attempt.
I don't get this idea that because he used every available legal loophole, quote unquote, in the tax law, that he's somehow a scofflaw. It leads to the question of, Scott, this guy's one of the richest guys in the world. He may be under audit, as he claims. He may not. He said he's been under audit, Donald Trump has, for 10 years, 12 years, 15. He says every year they audit me. If there were massive or even some irregularities in his tax returns, wouldn't the Internal Revenue Service have picked it up by now, Scott?
Definitely they would, and that's not what this is about. This isn't about irregularities. This is about promising an investigation into what may be an irregularity or may be revealing about collusion.
Like collusion.
Which, by the way, is not only just not accurate, but here's why it's a big lie, Tim. The president has to file, or candidates have to file as for federal office. As you, a former candidate for a federal office, the United States Senator, know, an exhaustive financial disclosure form detailing any corporation, partnership, LLC, you name it, that he may be involved in. Whereas a tax return just identifies taxable events and tax owed from those taxable events.
The bottom line of what you're saying is that you're going to learn maybe 10 times as much about someone's financial
underselling
life
it. Underselling it.
In a financial disclosure form for running for president than you are from any individual
1,000
tax
times
return.
more, Tim.
But the whole thing is just another attempt to gin something up against Trump.
Yeah.
Or am I wrong? Or is there any legitimacy to this?
It's even worse than that. They know that it's not there. In other words, anybody who says, any Democrat who says it, any media person who lets them say it unchallenged is somehow advancing the narrative that disclosure of the tax returns will somehow yield evidence of collusion or some impropriety like that.
Or obstruction of justice, don't forget that.
Right. It's not just unlikely. We're beyond the pale there. Because of what we know from the financial disclosures, we know that's a lie.
Let's continue with New York and lawmakers approving a budget with congestion pricing. And as someone that grew up in Manhattan, I can tell you I wouldn't have half minded if they
well,
passed
I'll tell you
it.
what.
But there's a principle I might have been willing to renounce
right.
if I still lived in New York. But now you're going to have to pay to drive into New York.
If you're poor and live in New York or near New York, that's where the congestion pricing, I think, really is a horror. Even just for people who aren't really wealthy, it becomes a burden. We're talking about so the exact number hasn't been decided yet, but it's $11 to $12 per vehicle or $25 per truck, and this is south of and inclusive of 60th Street. And so I wanted from you a geography lesson. What does that mean practically speaking, whether it's respect to neighborhoods or commuting for the people who need to get in and out of Manhattan?
That's basically where most commerce occurs, below 60th Street. Above 60th Street is mostly residential and retail.
Okay. But there is plenty of residential on south of 60th Street, right?
Well, there is. There's plenty of it, but there's also the bulk of commerce occurs there. So they wouldn't be able to accumulate as much money if they charge it coming over, say, the GW Bridge, which is north of Manhattan, as the Lincoln Tunnel or other ways into the south of Manhattan. But Uber apparently has spent, $2 million in the last 4 years to promote congestion pricing.
This is the other component of it. And we talk about crony capitalism. Well, how does it happen? And Uber's a company that we've lauded on this program, I believe, for knocking down some of the barriers for free markets to operate in the ride-sharing space. And now, as so often happens, they get to that level of success, and now they're going to try to turn and use the government to crush their competition. And in this case, the competition involves you, me, and every other free human being who has access to a car and can access Lower Manhattan anytime we want. Without having to pay a fine to do so. And that's the way it is. And
it's not a fine, Scott. It's a fee. It's a fee. Think of it like a toll.
I happen to know personally more than one person who drops off a spouse south of 60th Street who doesn't live in Manhattan. And it's costly enough for them to get into the city. And then now to have this additional fine. Or whatever. And then, Tim...
Now, you're implying that they're doing something illegal by coming into the city, but in a way, they're sort of acting like you don't belong here, so you're going to have to pay for the privilege to come into this city.
And another component of the fight now is, after this plan was released, again, so the numbers aren't yet firm, is who's going to be exempt from it. And then the fight gets started. All the civil service employees. Well, we're not going to have to, and everybody else. And so
the unions will go to work trying to get exemptions.
I think what is going to happen, sadly, Tim, is what's going to be left are the people who are going to have to pay this tax are rich people and people who don't have enough power, connections, or pull to get out of paying it through one of these other avenues, sadly.
On that note, thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, a civilized podcast with Mark Angelides, managing editor of LibertyNation.com. Both available, or all three of them, the radio show and both our podcasts available at LibertyNation.com on demand anytime, any place. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week, same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.